Hello everybody, just a disclaimer, if you have managed to avoid spoilers up to this point, I'm warning you right now, a large portion of this video is story discussion, which will include heavy spoilers. The Last of Us Part 2 has been surrounded by probably the most controversy since Death Stranding. Sony's decision to put a ridiculous embargo on the pre-release reviews, demanding that half of the game wasn't even to be discussed, combined with extremely well-known plot leaks across the internet, caused a divisive uproar among the gaming community weeks before it even released. It seems like the majority either love it or hate it, while I am personally somewhere in the middle. So in this review, you can expect both harsh criticisms and glorious praises. After consuming the initial pre-release reviews, then playing the game, it is very apparent that critics for major gaming outlets aren't writing reviews for the community, the developer, or even their employer. They are writing these reviews for each other, their peers. They just saw an opportunity to make themselves appear more intelligent than they actually are by presenting themselves as pretentious art snobs and pompous game critics.
The Last of Us Part 2 is a masterpiece worthy of its predecessor.
Last of Us Part 2 is a masterpiece.
Last of Us Part 2 is a generation-defining masterpiece.
Masterpiece.
Absolute masterpiece.
Stop saying that!
The Last of Us Part 2 is not a masterpiece. The Last of Us Part 2 is far from a 10 out of 10. The Last of Us Part 2 is a narrative mess with huge pacing issues and uninteresting characters. The Last of Us Part 2 does have an interesting story to tell. Now, there are a ton of people describing this game solely as a revenge story, but this story has more dimension to it than just that, because this story is just as much about love, forgiveness, and empathy as it is about hate and revenge. It's also about letting go of your obsession and ego that comes with these emotions and what it takes to do so. This story has a lot more gray areas than what some people are making it out to be. I actually really like the premise. It's the way that the story was told. It was just all over the place and clumsy. I think Naughty Dog was a little overambitious, and to me it just didn't pay off. But with the excellent gameplay, exemplary production value, and some truly riveting encounters, make The Last of Us Part 2 still worth playing. The Last of Us Part 2 picks up 4 years after the events of the first game and is primarily split up into two halves. Ellie and Joel live in Jackson, a thriving town ran by Joel's brother Tommy and his wife. The mushroom monster outbreak is still very much happening, and there are still numerous factions fighting against each other for power and resources. Namely the pseudo-religious cult the Seraphites and the larger, more militarized group called the WLF, or the Wolves. Even though you don't see as much of Jackson as I would have liked to, you could still tell that it's very healthy and a developing community. Everyone is safe. There are establishments that you walk by like greenhouses, a restaurant, an inn, a butcher shop, and a blacksmith. Ellie lives in a cozy little house and has a PlayStation 3 and plays Jackson Daxter. Everything looks like it's running smoothly and is prosperous. Dina is a new character and Ellie's love interest.
Oh, just what this town needs. Another loudmouth dyke.
You soon find out that Dina is pregnant with her ex's Jesse's baby, who's also one of Ellie's friends, so there's kind of a love triangle going on there. Unfortunately, they're both pretty one note and never get too fleshed out, so it's a bit hard to care about them. Dina also has hairy armpits because there are no razors in the apocalypse. Just imagine what her bush looks like. So the Big Bush couple head out on a regular patrol mission to eliminate any infected that may have roamed into their territory. During their patrol, a big blizzard happens and Ellie and Dina are forced to bunker down in a weed house where they get totally baked and fool around. Because who wouldn't smoke some joints they found in an abandoned grow-op? Then you get control of Abby, a newly introduced character whose motives you're still unaware of. She runs into Joel and Tommy while being chased by a horde of infected, totally by random. Then while being chased by the infected, the Incredible Hulk tells them that she has a safe house. They go in for safety, and then it happens. Abby proceeds to torture and kill Joel for reasons that you don't know of at this point. Ellie, who is trying to find Joel, also manages to walk in right in time for the death blow, begging for Joel's life.
Please stop! Please don't shoot! Joel, please get up!
This is where the story starts to get shitty. Listen, I don't care if Joel died. I think a lot of people were actually expecting it, but the way that it happened was just so disrespectful to the character. He went out like a little bitch at the beginning of the game for reasons that were still unexplained. Then he gets spat on and called a pendejo. Because this Manny guy is Mexican and he says pendejo a lot. Remember that Joel and Tommy have been surviving this outbreak for a quarter of a century. They wouldn't have let themselves get into this situation. They would have been more cautious, armed, and aware. They would have known better. This is Apocalypse Survival 101 stuff. They literally both went full Ben Stiller and Tropic Thunder and just went into a room filled with strangers.
Everybody knows you never go full retard.
Yes, you can argue that they're being chased by a horde and didn't really have any other options. I just think that Joel's death could have been handled with a bit more respect. Also remember that Joel and Abby met up purely by coincidence. Much later in the game, you find out that Abby's father worked for the Fireflies and was actually the doctor that Joel kills at the end of the first game, and that for the past 4 years, Abby has had a personal vendetta against Joel and has been hunting him down this whole time. Furthermore, Abby decided to let Ellie and Tommy live for some reason. She knew that Joel and Tommy were brothers and that Joel was somehow important to Ellie. Why wouldn't she just kill them? Did she think that they would just let this go? The other people in her crew wanted to kill them and Abby technically saved their lives. Yes, you can argue that Abby was just out for Joel and spared Ellie and Tommy in an attempt to humanize her character, but remember that Abby is just as much of a cold-blooded killer as Ellie. What's another 2 lives to secure her and her crew's protection? After these events, Ellie and Dina return back to Jackson to prepare to go out and hunt down Abby. You find out that Tommy has left before you and he told his wife to stop you if you tried to go, which of course doesn't happen. So the next 10 hours or so takes place almost entirely in Seattle. Actually, the whole game takes place almost entirely in Seattle. You're following lead after lead and picking off Abby's crew one by one. It's at this point in the game where you will take notice of some of the very apparent pacing issues. There are a few points where the whole gameplay loop becomes exhausting. There were numerous times where I just wanted to get to my destination to see what was going to happen next. This is largely due to the lack of variation in set pieces and settings. Everything just kind of looked samey. In the first half of the game anyways. There are a handful of flashback scenes to break up the monotony, which I thought were done very well and were probably the best written parts of the game. During one of these flashbacks, you'll find out that Joel and Ellie has had a falling out because Ellie learned about what happened with the Fireflies and can't seem to forgive Joel for what he did. The falling out happened about 2 years prior and is suggested that they haven't spoken as friends since. It was top-notch writing during these flashbacks, and it seemed like Naughty Dog wrote them before they wrote the rest of the game. Just before the end of the first half, Ellie kills Abby's ex-boyfriend and his pregnant girlfriend. Yeah, there are 2 love triangles going on in this game, both involving pregnancies. So Ellie kills the lady, who finds out is pregnant after she killed her, and then starts to be physically and psychologically ill. Ellie is a mass-murdering psychopath who has shown no emotion except anger and hate while killing hundreds of people. Why does she suddenly feel empathy now? It doesn't make any sense that her emotions are only conditioned if she's killing a pregnant lady. She hasn't considered the fact that the piles of bodies she's left behind might have families, or that they're also doing what they need to do to survive in a post-apocalyptic world, or that some of the other women she's slayed might be pregnant. Okay, so after she killed the pregnant lady, she was obviously emotionally destroyed. That means that she's going to start thinking twice about killing people now, right? She's learned a lesson? I guess not. Why are people letting pregnant people out anyway, knowing that at any moment there's a very good chance that they could be killed? Do you know how dangerous it is in the apocalypse? And if you can make a med kit with a rag and alcohol, you can make an abortion kit with 2 scissors and a popsicle stick. There's also this dog that the game makes you kill as Ellie. Then later on in the game you find out that Abby was close to her. You play fetch with it, as if the game is trying to make you feel bad for killing a dog that the game made you kill, just because you played fetch with it. This dog wasn't a companion or anything, and at this point you've been killing dogs for hours before this one. Why would I care about this stupid dog? Why am I supposed to feel bad about killing something that I have very little connection with? And the whole enemies have names thing didn't affect me one bit. Why should I feel bad for these people when I'm killing 20 of them each encounter, 3 of which are named Maggie? All while giving me the pleasure of setting traps, bashing their heads with bricks, and exploding them with pipe bombs. Not to mention the satisfaction you get when you get a headshot with your last arrow. Why is this game telling me that killing is bad and to feel bad about it, while the whole time I'm being entertained and having fun killing people? I have no attachment to any of these people. They are just your run-of-the-mill video game thugs. It makes no sense at all. It's also worth mentioning that Abby kills Jesse, Ellie's friend and the father of Dina's baby. But I didn't really care because, again, I had no emotional connection with him since he's only been in a few scenes in the game. I also almost immediately forgot about him after his death because he's literally not mentioned again for the rest of the game. All of the supporting characters who die just feel like cannon fodder. So at the end of Ellie's part, when you finally meet up with Abby again, the narrative switches over. Time goes back the 3 days that you were playing as Ellie, and you play Abby's story in the same timeline that parallels Ellie's. This was a great idea, but unfortunately was executed poorly. But I actually found Abby as a character more interesting compared to Ellie. Abby had more dimension, and I found that the events that took place on her side more compelling. Don't get me wrong, she's still a cold-blooded killing machine, but she wasn't as one-note as Ellie. Abby had greater responsibilities and sacrifices, and arguably much more to lose. The more I played as Abby, the more I realized how much of the story was hers as well, and how in her eyes Joel was very much the antagonist of her story, and how she wasn't any more or less evil than Ellie or Joel. Once you see her side of the story, you understand that her responsibilities and motivations are not any more impure than anyone else's, and you understand that it's a dog-eat-dog world, and a good guy in one person's eyes can be a bad guy in another. Even though Abby's segment was also too long, I was much more entertained while playing as her. And when I mean too long, I mean just like Ellie's, her part could have probably been cut in half. A large portion of Abby's part is a side quest that involves helping 2 siblings, Lev and Yara, which has absolutely nothing to do with the main story and lasts probably about 6 hours. There were definitely some intriguing and compelling moments during this time, and Lev turned out to be one of my favorite characters in the game. But the time that you spend with him add up to around a quarter of the whole game and was completely pointless to the main story. And when you start off as Abby, all of your skills and upgrades get reset. So everything that you've just worked for the past 15 hours is all gone. It wouldn't have been such a bummer if the skill trees and weapons weren't so similar, but I couldn't help but feel like my entire progress with Ellie was for nothing on account that it just got scrapped. So at the end of Abby's part, she ends up sparing Ellie's life for a second time, Dina's as well. Then the story cuts to Ellie again. Her and Dina are living a perfect life on a farm with a baby who they named JJ, for Jesse Joel. Ellie gets word from Tommy of Abby's location and decides to leave everything that she had to go track her down yet again. It's at this part they put you through another very lengthy, unwanted encounter. It's very unnecessary. She kills another 100 people, murdering her way to Abby. And do you know when she decides to develop morals? When she finally reaches Abby and is about to kill her. Yeah. Do you know why? Because after all this time, it is now at this moment when she decides to reminisce about a time when she was having a conversation with Joel on his porch, talking to him about when he took her from the Fireflies. Joel asks her to forgive him and she says that she'll try, suggesting that she was seriously trying. implying that you could forgive the unforgivable. So again, after presumably months of Ellie hunting Abby down, leaving her dream life, a girlfriend, and a baby, when she is literally seconds away from killing Abby after threatening a passed out helpless boy with a knife to his throat, making Abby fight her, she decides that it is now that she could let her go and forgive her. Right now? After all of this? Then you know what happens? She goes home to find an empty house because Dina has left. Then you see her walking into the distance with nothing. Roll credits. So not only did Joel go out like a little bitch, Ellie looks like a loser as well. Congrats, Naughty Dog, you have ruined two main characters in one of my favorite games of all time. I'm talking about the first one. If you've played The Last of Us Part 1, then you know what you're in for in terms of gameplay, because it's almost exactly the same, but just with a little more polish and a couple new mechanics. Which isn't necessarily a bad thing. I quite like the gameplay in the first one, and if it's just more of that, then that's just fine with me. And they added the ability to go prone and crawl around, opening up the option to hide in grass or underneath cars. You can now dodge melee attacks, which makes some fights a bit more dynamic, even though there's still only one attack of your own. You literally just press L1 to dodge and then follow up with square every single time. And there's now a jump button, which pretty much is only used for some platforming puzzles, which really isn't needed. They could have left all of the environmental puzzles out and I would have been perfectly fine with it. They just seem like unnecessary padding in a game that's already probably 10 hours too long. This is still very much a hide-and-seek, stealth until you get caught, then run around and shoot game, with arenas perfectly designed so you never find yourself getting cornered or without resources. This is not Metal Gear Solid 5 level of stealth gameplay, but it's still really good.
To the point
Can I say
of,
something crazy?
Yeah.
Gameplay wise, this game reminded me of Metal Gear Solid 5.
No, 100%.
I think that this game feels as good as Metal Gear Solid 5, and I've said for years that Metal Gear Solid 5 has perfect gameplay.
Shut the fuck up. You'll also be doing a lot of scavenging and crafting. And I mean a lot. I played this on normal and the resources were very abundant, to the point where scavenging just got exhausting. You don't need to pick up this many resources, just make the crafting requirements a little less. The infected this time around are creepier and grosser more than ever. You still have your clickers, the blind infected who walk around convulsing and twitching like Donald Trump mocking a physically handicapped person. You also have your runners and bloaters, but new this time around are shamblers who expel toxic gas which causes blindness and damage. And you also have your stalkers who are invisible in listen mode and generally stay hidden until they could get the jump on you. And if you look close enough, you could see their little cock and balls. It's also surprising how well this game runs. Not once did I ever experience frame rate dips, no texture pop-ins, no bugs, and not a single loading screen after the initial one for booting up the game. And if you die. Technically, this game was perfect. Seattle is rich with detail. These are some of the best graphics that you will see on the PlayStation 4. It's on par with other top dogs like God of War and Death Stranding. From the individual blades of grass in the foliage, to the particle and lighting effects, to the character models, to the sprawling vistas, this game is a visual feast. The voice acting, as expected from Naughty Dog, is fantastic as well, with Ashley Johnson, Troy Baker, and Laura Bailey giving flawless performances. Okay, so even though I'm glad I've played this game, I still consider it very flawed and a failure as a sequel. Now you might be thinking, failure? That's pretty harsh. How can you say you're glad that you've played a failure of a game? Well, it's because that The Last of Us Part 1 was such an exceptional game that in my opinion, it didn't even need a sequel, and that surpassing it would be an impossible endeavor. The Last of Us Part 2 didn't even come close to even being on the same level as the first one, but I'm still glad I played it. And I don't know if I'd recommend it right now at full price. There's no multiplayer, and it is overall a disappointment. But I mean, if you're a fan of the first one, you should play this one. Thank you for watching my review. I applaud you if you made it this far. I know it was a long video. Peace out.